So one of the decisions that a lot of private practice owners need to make is whether or not they want to accept or insurance or be on insurance panels. And a lot of that decision depends on the demographics of your area and what you feel like your clients need. And if you do decide to go onto insurance panels or maybe just thinking about it, one of the ways to do that is to talk to the folks at Practice Solutions. They are absolutely the experts in insurance billing and credentialing, and they do all the hard work for you. They're who I use in my practice. So go check them out today, and you can find out about them by going to practicesol.com/Gordon and talk to Jeremy and his team, and they'll help you out in navigating the whole insurance piece and help you take the headaches out of it. This is the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, helping you to navigate your private practice journey. This is session number 67 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Hello, folks. I'm Gordon Brewer, and I'm so glad you've joined me for the Practice of Therapy podcast. If this is the first time listening to the podcast, welcome, and I hope you'll come back. And for those of you that have been listening for a while, I'm so glad you're part of this journey with me, and I appreciate the fact that you've maybe subscribed to the podcast and listen every week. I hear from a lot of you, and I know you're out there, and I so appreciate the fact that you're choosing to listen to this podcast, and I hope it's worthwhile for you. That's the whole reason that I do it, is to help people out in their private practice journey and to give information and resources that are truly helpful to people. And also a little bit selfish reason for it is I get to talk to a lot of great people along the way, get to interview some great folks. But today on this episode is just me, folks, but I wanted to talk about something that's a pretty important topic for most of us, and that's just ethics, and particularly the ethics of the financial side of private practice. It's not something we learn about in school, but it's a topic that I think we need to think about. So I'll get into that here in a little bit. But one of the things I did want to make sure you know is that I do have a course that I've put together, and it's called Money Matters in Private Practice. And right now I'm in the pre-launch phase of that, putting that course together. I'm putting content in every week, and I knew that I had been talking a lot about it. You know, sometimes our best made plans don't always go as planned. I had really intended to get the whole course in place and then launch it, but because I've heard from so many people asking about it and wanting to dive into it, I decided to do a pre-launch. So far I've got about 5 or 6 lessons up there on the platform, and during this pre-launch period, I'm giving a pretty big price break for the course. I'm letting folks have the entire course for half the regular price. And so if you'll go over to practiceoftherapy.com/finance course, you can see the links there. And when you go to enroll in the course, if it doesn't give it to you automatically, the 50% off, you can use the coupon code TAKE50, and that will make sure that you get the course at half off. I just finished this week, finished up the tax module and have 2 videos in that particular module or lesson or whatever you want to call it. And I had a little bit of some bonus material there as well. I had an interview that I did some time ago with my friend who's a CPA, Billy Robinson. So it get to hear him talk about the taxes. And I know last week's episode, that was what I devoted this to, was just talking about taxes, since we are, as I'm recording this, in the middle of tax season. So it's on our radar. So anyway, I invite you to go over and take a look at the Money Matters course and take advantage of the half price that I'm offering right now. It's only going to be for a while I'm in this pre-launch stage. Once I get the full course up there, the price will go up. So I just want to give you a fair warning on that. So, and if you've bought the course already, I thank you for that. And hopefully, again, it's intended to teach you lots of stuff, all the stuff we didn't learn about the business side and the financial side of private practice. I'll walk you through that, and we get real basic and get real about finances, and hopefully it teaches you a lot. So as you can tell, I've been on a theme here lately about the financial side. Part of it is just that's what's been on my mind here lately. And while I've had this opportunity between the guests that I've had, and I've got a lot of great guests coming up, so stay tuned for those. I've got my friend Laura Long was not able to join me, but she's coming up here later. She got, I think she's over the flu now, but she had to reschedule with me about that interview. But I've got several other people coming up. I've got Laura Painter, who is a human resources expert. So that episode is going to be great for those of us that have group practices and learning about all of that. I've got Lisa, I want to say Liz, but it's Lisa Wozniak, and I was on Lisa's YouTube channel earlier this week, and probably if you'll go over and check her out on YouTube, she interviewed me, and probably we might try to work out getting a reverse interview, but I've got Lisa coming up on the podcast, and her superpower is marketing, and she's another therapist that's really branched out into this whole niche of marketing and teaching therapists how to market their practice. So I've got her coming up, and then I've got another person that's going to be coming up later in the year. Somebody I met online, and he reached out to me, and I reached out to him, and it worked out well. But his name is Jeff Simons, and Jeff is over in the UK. He's one of our friendly Brits, and Jeff and I are going to talk about some of the differences between being in practice here in the States versus being in practice in the UK, in the United Kingdom, and in England. And so I'm looking forward to that. As I shared in an earlier episode about my DNA results, it turns out I'm 74% English anyway. So I'm looking forward to talking to Jeff in a future episode. So, and I've got a few other guests lined up, and without having that list in front of me, I'm excited about these future episodes. So be sure and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out wherever you might be listening to the podcast, whether it be on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play or wherever you might be listening to the podcast, Spotify. Subscribe to the podcast, and that way you get the feed as soon as it comes out, and I appreciate that. So without further ado, here I'm going to talk about the ethical side of finances, the ethical financial matters in private practice. You know, back when I was in graduate school, there wasn't a whole lot of discussion about the money side of being in clinical practice. You know, I remember that one of the courses I enjoyed the most, which I don't know, maybe it's just kind of the way I geek out on things. I really enjoyed the clinical and legal and ethical issues and counseling was the name of the course. And all of us are required to have that component to be licensed. And in fact, in most states, we're required to get legal and ethical clinical continuing education hours for our licensure. So it's something that stays in the forefront for us. But you know, most of the legal and ethical issues that come up around our clinical work have to do more with breaking confidentiality and also the duty to report. And those two issues are really kind of in the forefront of that. But I remember in graduate school, we did have a little bit of discussion about money, particularly around doing pro bono work, of being able to, accept those clients that weren't able to pay us or weren't able to pay our full fee. And, a big part of the ethics of the financial side of private practice, I think we really do need to have some sort of vehicle, whether it's through a sliding scale fee, and I'll hopefully talk a little bit more about sliding scales here in a minute. But one of the things is being able to carve out some times and pro bono work for our clients. And part of just being a part of a community is being able to help those folks that maybe are struggling financially. Certainly, we can't take all those clients. We wouldn't be able to stay in business, but that's an important part of an important thing to consider. But I want to just kind of outline for you here some things that I've been thinking about in terms of the ethical side of finances in private practice, and maybe give you a few things to think about, some things to consider in your own practice of just being able to implement these things, because I think it is, ethics is a big part of what we do. All of our licensure organizations, whether you're a professional counselor, a marriage and family therapist, social worker, or psychologist, or any of the medical professions, we have codes of ethics that we adhere to and that we follow. And usually within those codes of ethics are something about the financial piece of it. I mean, about things like being able to, charging a reasonable rate. And indirectly related to that is, how we are kind of mandated to market our services in terms of what is an ethical way to market your services and all of those kinds of things. So anyway, let's talk about this a little bit. First of all, when clients come to see us, I think they all come to see us with the expectation that they pay for our services. Very rarely does anybody come in just thinking they're going to get free services. A lot of times, I know one of the things that is a deciding factor for a lot of people, clients, potential clients or whatever, is whether or not we take insurance or not, or whether or not we accept insurance. They do kind of their therapist shopping based on who's able to accept the insurance that they have paid for. And so those are certainly considerations that people put into play when they're thinking about picking a therapist. Certainly in terms of the financial side of things, if you are on insurance panels, you're bound by a contract that you have with those particular clients using that insurance. You have to provide services to those people. You can't say, well, I'm going to take you as a client, but you can't use your insurance with me if you've signed a contract with that insurance company. You're bound legally through your contract to provide services to those people at the rate that you contracted with. So you can't charge them more than that. So again, that's an ethical, legal kind of issue that can come up. But one of the things I want you to maybe think about is, people expect to pay for services, and so when we accept that payment, we need to do it in a way that is going to be ethical and in a way that is going to work for us financially and be financially viable. One of the big problems that I hear from people or have heard about from people are just stories about where maybe people have a large client base and they are on a lot of insurance panels, but because they have not managed their money well, they don't stay in business. They don't have the systems in place to track things. It might be that they're very disorganized and don't have a way of knowing what they're billing clients or what they're not billing clients, and whether clients have paid them or not. All of those things can create problems just from a business standpoint of the right hand not knowing what the left is doing. So one of the things that's important to do is to have systems in place that enables you to track the money from the time that the client comes in and pays you for their services, that you have a way of tracking that. Not only on the clinical side, in other words, keeping records about individual clients, but also knowing how you handle the money after that. So, first of all, first thing I want to mention, which this kind of leads into, is having documentation in place. If you are in private practice and somebody pays you for your services, how do you document that payment? So here's some ideas about that. First of all, there's just the whole clinical side of the documentation. We're going to do progress notes, session notes, those sorts of things. Most of us, a lot of us that have larger practices are also using some sort of electronic health record system. And really in this day and age, if you're going to accept insurance, you pretty much need some kind of electronic health record system in place that will help you with filing your claims and those sort of things. And I'll put a plug in here for Therapy Notes, which is the system that I use. And so in that system, there's also a financial component to it. There's a patient billing section, and it's connected to the insurance claims part of it. And so it doesn't really, that part of the system doesn't really go into what we did in session in terms of session notes or progress notes, those kinds of things. But it's a separate section within that electronic health record system that is a secure system. And so in that, you can, I can go in and look and see what a patient, client owes for a session. It will let me know whether the claims have been filed or not, what I can expect to receive from the insurance company, and also what the patient might owe for their copay or deductibles, those kinds of things. So having the systems in place is going to help you a lot in just the business side of things. And that's a whole piece that deals with each individual client. So each individual client has a payment record. If you're just getting started, though, in private practice, you can set up something similar just by using a simple spreadsheet, or as I did back in the early days, back when I was still using paper records, I had a sheet that I printed out that was just an appointment and appointment day and payment record. So I had on that sheet, if you can kind of imagine, at the top of the sheet, I had the date of the session, I had the client's name, and then what was owed for the session, and then what they paid. And so it was just a very simple, just kind of spreadsheet kind of thing. And so I was able to track just that portion of it, what they paid, what they owed, and that was for that each individual client. And I would have a sheet like that for each client in their folder. So when they came in and paid me for a session, I'd mark it on the sheet, and that was just a record within their, that was just part of their patient record, their patient file that I kept in there. So you do the same thing with electronic health records. It's just, of course, done electronically. The other side of this, though, is the whole business side of it. So you receive a payment from your client, and they've paid you for your session, and you document that, but then you need to know what to do with the money next. So obviously you're probably going to want to put it in the bank or do something like that. So what I think is really necessary is to have a whole other system for the business side of your finances. Now, what I use in my practice is QuickBooks, and that's just what I've used since the beginning when I first started into private practice, and that just kind of tracks what I bring in. And so in QuickBooks, there are no patient or client names associated with the what I receive. So I've got an account set up that is just fee for service, an account. So as money comes in, I put that money into that fee for service account. And the only notation there that I might have is this was a client session that I got money for. And so that part of it is just simply a way to track the income of my business and also the expenses that I might incur for my business. So it's a whole separate accounting system. So the ethical way, and this is part of this is my opinion, but I think that most people would agree with this. The ethical way to keep track of the money is have one system that tracks the money that comes in for an individual client that is attached to their client records, their record file, and then another system that just tracks what comes in for the practice or for the business. And hopefully that makes sense to you in thinking about that. So some other things that you might need to take into consideration in just thinking about the ethical treatment of finances. I'm probably going about this a little bit backwards, but one of the things about keeping the records and keeping those things up is that helps keep your practice financially viable. If you are making a profit, which everybody should make a profit with their practice, unless you're working as a nonprofit, even as a nonprofit organization, you've got to make a profit in order to stay in business. You've got to bring in more money than you spend. And so having a way to track all of that and being able to have some reports in place so that you know whether or not you're making a profit or not. And simply put, in order to have a profit, the amount of income that you have needs to exceed the amount of expenditures or the expenses that you have. That's just basic math. And so being able to have a way to track that and monitor that over time is real important. One of the things that I talk about in my Money Matters course are just looking at your different reports. So in other words, knowing your profit and loss statement, which is just simply that. You look at what you're bringing in and then what you're losing out. And so that it gives you a net profit or a net figure at the end of each month. So you know whether you're ahead or not. The other things are balance sheets, and that's just really looks at the assets that you have in your practice, the things that you own, the amount of cash you have in the bank. All of those things are important things to know and keep track of. And hopefully as one of the part of your assets is considered part of your net worth, what is the value of your practice. And hopefully as you move along, the longer you're in practice, the more your net worth is increasing. So you want the value of your practice and all of that to increase over time. The other thing to take into consideration, and again, I'm probably going about this maybe a little backwards, but it was just the way I tended to think about it, was to think about what you charge for your sessions. In order to stay in business, you've got to make a profit. And so you need to be charging or at least averaging enough to where you're able to do that. If you're not charging enough, you're probably not going to make that much of a profit. And in fact, you might even be losing money. One of the things that I did early on when I first went into private practice was I established a sliding scale fee with my thinking of being, and I think this is still a good idea for some practices. And I have that in place. I have a sliding scale in place in my own practice, and I have it in place mainly for those people that either don't have insurance or they choose not to use their insurance for counseling purposes. And it's just another added service that I have. Sliding scale fee is just simply a fee system based on a person's income. Having a fee schedule that is based on a family's income or a person's income, typically it's, a lot of times you'll see at nonprofit organizations, they'll have a sliding scale fee. I know there's a counseling center here in town that, in fact, I refer to them fairly often, that has a sliding scale fee that is just based on family income. And what that does is that just gives people that are maybe don't have insurance or a way to pay for counseling a fair fee for what you do. Now, there's no right or wrong answer to this as far as where you should set your fees, but my point being is don't set them too low. In other words, if I know when I first started into private practice, my bottom row fee on my sliding scale fee was only $30. Well, guess what? I ended up getting a lot of those $30 clients. And even if I saw just a whole bunch of them, that would not maintain me being able to keep my practice in place. So if you have a sliding scale fee, make sure that your scale is in a range that is going to be viable for you, but also fair to the clients. One suggestion I have about sliding scale fees is set your lowest fee, your lowest rank on your fee scale at what your average per session rate is. So, or at least in line with if you're taking insurance, what your lowest insurance company pays you. In other words, our insurance contracts can vary. So just set the fee at a place where you can stay in business and be viable. And I might have mentioned this at the beginning, and I want to reiterate this. One of the ethical considerations is that our clients depend on us. They are expecting to come to sessions. They are expecting us to be there and to be there for them. And in order for us to be there for them, we've got to stay financially viable. If I were to go out of business tomorrow because I didn't run my finances correctly, there would be a lot of people that would be hurt by that. There would be a lot of people that would be let down by that. So just want to get on that soapbox a little bit. You need to pay yourself a reasonable fee, but also it needs to be profitable. The other thing to take into consideration around the ethics of the financial side of it is obviously communicating to clients what our fees are on the front end, and what is expected around the payment of fees. And so having a good fee payment policy in place, a lot of times people will include that in their informed consent forms. I think that it's probably a good idea to have a separate form just for the fees. You want to mention in your informed consent that there is a fee expected for your services, but have a separate sheet that they have to sign or initial or whatever that talks specifically about the fees and what is expected around that. So for most of us, again, is for, the fee obviously is due at the time of the session. And I think that's a reasonable thing, and that, and you can handle that in any number of ways. For some therapists, they prefer to collect the fee at the beginning of the session, some at the end of the session. I don't think it really matters that much, but it needs to be a process that we call attention to, and that is part of, to some degree, a separate part from the clinical session, from what we're doing in our session. So, one idea that you might have heard from me before, when we collect our fees at my practice, we collect them outside the therapy room. Now, I know logistically that might not be possible for everyone, but I think it just kind of sends a different message that, okay, in the therapy room, we're doing the clinical stuff, the therapy, the feel-good stuff, all of that. But once we leave the therapy room, then we switch gears and we're doing business stuff. And I think that, again, setting that expectation on the front end is really clear. You're really clear with people and upfront about that. And I would also say, talk about it in your first session with your new clients. Is talk about fee expectation, talk about no-show expectations. That's another area that again affects the financial viability of our practices. If you're having a lot of no-shows for people coming to you, that's something you need to address, and you really have an ethical responsibility to address that with your clients, because a lot of times clients not showing up for sessions is a clinical issue. I know that was something that was kind of ingrained in me back when I was in graduate school, is if you have a person that constantly is no-showing or constantly changing appointment times, is to be able to ask what's going on with that or what's up with that, so that you know that what is it that's causing them to avoid coming to sessions. So again, something to think about. But I think the best place to address that is in the very first session when people come, and then making sure it's very plain and upfront in your intake paperwork, particularly the fee payment paperwork, is that they'll get charged if they no-show you for a session or miss a session. Another thing too that is a kind of a side note to that, and something that we started doing this year in our practice, is that we're keeping people's credit card numbers. We're keeping it electronically in a secure place. I had to go look up a credit card, I could do that, but it's kept in a way that I don't even need to look at it, and it's not really something I need to know. But and that's one of the things about again, another blatant plug for Therapy Notes, that their system allows you to do that. You can swipe the credit card and store it, and so we put into place a policy, a credit card policy or credit card on file policy that people sign off on when they come to do the intake. And so we get that credit card number. If they miss an appointment, we charge them. And so anyway, and the on the upside of it is that most people are willing to do that. I was really kind of surprised. And if you think about it, if you do any shopping online, like with Amazon or whatever, you can set up your payment method and they keep your credit card on file. So that was a mindset shift for me. I was really, quite honestly, leery of doing that because I felt like, I'm imposing too much on people. I do give them the option, but I also put in our paperwork is that if we have to collect from them for a no-show charge, because we don't have their credit card on file, we also add an additional surcharge to that. So again, that's very plain in the paperwork, and they understand that on the front end. And most of the time we talk with them about that on the intake session. So again, it's the duty to informed consent, all of that is part of the ethical side of private practice, which we all know well and has been ingrained with us. Let's see, what else did I have on my list here about the financial side? I think I've pretty well covered it. The final thing, that was one thing I did miss, is the importance of keeping good records just from a tax standpoint. if you talk to an accountant, and this is one of the things that I hit on in my Money Matters course, and in fact, I just got through recording the session that I did on taxes, which is all there in the course now, is the importance of keeping records so that at the end of the year, when we go to file our taxes, we've got good records in place and can give an accurate accounting of that. And as they say, God forbid you ever get audited. That's what they're going to want to know, is they're going to want to know how you're keeping your records and the proof that you have that the expenses that you're declaring on your taxes are deducting from your taxes, that you've got proof of that. And so keeping accurate records and keeping accurate books, so to speak, is just so important to remain ethical. And, like it or not, we have to all pay taxes. That's one of the things I talked about in the previous episode of the podcast, is just about doing the taxes and what you need to know about that. So that's but on the ethical side of things, it's something that we need to do. We don't need to get ourselves in trouble by owing a big tax bill because we weren't tracking things or paying those, as a self-employed person, paying those quarterly self-employment taxes. Because if you got, what would it be like to be stuck with a $10,000 tax bill at the end of the year? Wouldn't be very fun. And I've known people where that has happened to them, and it was just because they didn't keep the records. They didn't pay a tax bill regularly, and so they ended up owing that plus being penalized at the end of the year because they just didn't keep the records and didn't stay on top of paying those bills. So anyway, again, that's another ethical thing. You want to be able to act with integrity. You want to be able to be ethical about not only what you're doing clinically with people, but also on the business side of it, to run an ethical and a sound business with your private practice. One final thing I'll say here about just the ethical side of private practice is when all else fails, err on the side of the client. If you feel like the client owes you money, and even if you're not able to collect on it, just live with that. Because I think in the long run, that's going to help you. Always do the right thing. I've always kept that philosophy in my own practice, and I know I've had that conversation with the therapists that are working with me. Always err on the side of the client and what's going to benefit the client most, not necessarily what's going to benefit us the best. And financially, you've got to be financially viable, and you've got to have good financial practices in place, but do what is in the best interest of your clients. And that's the bottom line with ethics anyway, is doing no harm and doing what is helping people and is honest and done with integrity. So hopefully this has been helpful information for you. I know I've jumped around a little bit in this. I did make some notes before I started and tried to stick to my notes, but I know I get off on tangents and that sort of thing. That's it for the ethics, my talk on ethics. So hopefully this has been helpful information for you. Well, folks, I hope that this has been a helpful episode for you and given you some things to think about and things to consider around the whole ethics of finance and why it's important for not only the viability of your practice, but also why it's important to our clients and making sure that we're there for them and taking care of that side of things for them in an ethical manner. Do take the time to go over and check out our sponsor for today's episode, and that's Practice Solutions. And you can find them at practicesol.com. Gordon and check out what they have to offer. If you're doing insurance, if you're accepting insurance and or even thinking about going on insurance panels, they will make your life so much easier. They're who I use in my practice, and I'm so glad I've got them as part of my one of those business relationships I'm so glad that I have. So check them out today at practicesol.com/Gordon. And also be sure to check out the Money Matters course and take advantage of that this half price period going on during the pre-launch. And you can get that at practiceoftherapy.com/finance course. And tune in for the future episodes. I've got some great guests coming up. One of the guests, I was put a plug in for her. Her name is Lisa Wozniak, and she had me this past week on her YouTube channel. And I'll be sure and get links posted on the website to that, the interview I did with her and on her YouTube channel. And certainly check me out on social media. And you can go to our Facebook page, Practice of Therapy on Facebook, also on Twitter and LinkedIn. I've got some information about that, and you can access that. But Lisa's going to be a guest of mine here shortly in the future, and looking forward for you to get to know her and find out about what she does. Her superpower is in marketing, and particularly helping therapists market their practice and get their name out there and learn how to help their practice grow. So we've got that to look forward to. Again, take the time to subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it, and leave us a review and give us a rating. That just helps us boost us up so other people can find us. Hit a milestone this past month. In January, we had over 3,000 downloads of the podcast. I cannot believe it. So I'm doing my happy dance here, and I'm so glad that all of you listening are taking the time out of your day and out of your lives to let me into your ears and learn about private practice. So glad you're with me on this journey. Take care, folks. Been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free private practice startup guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.